Chapter 1. Shadows Over Cosmir. Admiral Aeon stood in the darkened war room, watching the hollow projection of Cosmir's urban sprawl hover in midair, the bright lines of its main transport routes cutting through blocks of dense, pulsating light. The planet's capital city, Vassar, gleamed with the energy of nearly 1 billion lives, each caught up in the rhythm of the Federation's core world. But somewhere in the glittering maze, under the veil of normalcy, something darker was taking shape. Aeon adjusted his stance as the holoprojection zoomed in on a block of data. Encrypted transmissions and fragmented signals from a known Red faction cell. The rebel group, inspired by the rigid, collective doctrines of the Galactic Council, had gained traction in the slums of Cosmir, stoking discontent among the marginalized and disenfranchised. This was a problem Aeon had dealt with countless times, but this cell was different, better armed, better organized, and insidiously quiet. In the center of the briefing table, a glowing sphere marked the location of the Terran embassy, situated within the old city's diplomatic district, a 1 square kilometer fortress of Terran architecture, bordered by sleek white walls and defensive towers, imposing yet peaceful. The embassy stood as a silent monument to the Republic's unusual stance, non-intervention, peace, and neutrality, in contrast to the Federation's and Council's militaristic stance. A junior intelligence analyst broke the silence. "Admiral, the latest chatter suggests potential targets for Red Faction's next strike," she said, her voice carrying a tremor of anxiety. "Go on," Aeon replied, his gaze fixed on the hologram. She glanced at her tablet. "Given their anti-establishment rhetoric, we've identified high-profile targets. The main governmental complex, the Terran embassy, and key transport hubs. We suspect they may be planning a large-scale assault." Aeon narrowed his eyes. "The Terran embassy? Why would Red Faction target the Republic? They're the only major faction that hasn't opposed the Council or taken a stance in this Cold War. They're practically pacifists?" The analyst paused, hesitant. "With respect, sir, some in Red Faction may see the Republic's neutrality as a threat. Their accords, free trade, unrestricted navigation, they're, well, antithetical to Council ideology. Even their carabinari patrols are seen as enforcing these foreign ideas on neutral ground." Aeon's mind raced. The Federation was accustomed to treating the Terrans as a stable ally, or at the very least, a known entity. Their policies of free navigation and self-imposed restraint were radically different from the Federation's pragmatic approach to power. Yet those same policies had kept the peace between Federation and Council territories, creating a buffer zone between the superpowers. For Red Faction radicals to target the Terrans was a bold move, one with deep ideological implications, and potentially devastating consequences. "Bring up any recent activity near the embassy grounds," Aeon ordered. "I want eyes on this. If they're planning to target the Republic, we need to be ready." The analyst tapped her tablet, and the holoprojection shifted to real-time feeds of the old city district surrounding the embassy. Cameras panned over the crowded streets, scanning each face and movement. Traders, students, tourists, all going about their daily lives in blissful ignorance of the danger simmering just below the surface. A quiet buzz came over Aeon's personal comm. He tapped his earpiece. "Admiral, I've intercepted coded transmissions from Red Faction," a voice said, filtered through the encryption software. It was Lieutenant Karen, Aeon's trusted aide. "They're referencing something called Operation Sovereign Tide. No clear targets stated, but it's tied to the arms smuggling routes we've been tracking." Aeon felt a chill. Sovereign Tide. The phrase resonated with the Council's rhetoric of unity and control, a message that rang sharply against the Federation's foundational ideals of freedom. This was no small operation. They were planning something big, something symbolic. "Get me everything you have on Sovereign Tide," Aeon said sharply. "I don't care how many networks you have to tap. Pull analysts from across all sectors if you have to, but I want it before they make a move." Karen hesitated. "Understood, sir. There's one more thing." Go on." "There was a request from the Terran Embassy, an unusual one. They want to meet with Federation intelligence regarding an imminent threat. They haven't provided any details." Ione arched an eyebrow. The Terrans had never approached the Federation for intelligence cooperation, preferring to keep a distance from Federation military operations, even on their own doorstep. "Arrange the meeting. I want to know what they know." He turned to the analyst. "Patch in Lieutenant Karen's data as soon as he uploads it, and inform local authorities in Vassar to increase their patrols near the embassy." The analyst gave a curt nod and set to work. As the hologram zoomed in further on the embassy, Aeon couldn't shake the feeling that something profound was unfolding. The Terrans were careful to avoid conflict, opting for diplomacy over confrontation, navigating alliances with the grace of diplomats rather than conquerors. Their non-interventionist stance, though sometimes frustrating, had kept them from being a target in the Federation Council's stalemate. But now, as Red Faction's radicalism spread across Cosmir's underbelly, that delicate neutrality was at risk of being shattered. In his gut, Aeon knew this was no ordinary terror plot. Admiral Aeon opened the secure channel to the Terran embassy, bracing himself for the conversation ahead. On the other end appeared the image of Kenneth Alito, the Terran diplomat. Alito's calm, unassuming expression belied a penetrating gaze, one that had long been rumored to see through any facade. "Admiral Aeon," Alito began, his voice steady, "I trust you're fully aware of Red Faction's recent activities." Aeon blinked, careful to keep his surprise from showing. How had the Terrans gotten wind of this already, he wondered, but he forced himself to remain outwardly composed. "Yes," Aeon replied smoothly, leaning into the well-rehearsed diplomatic language that Federation officers used. "We were preparing an official communiqué to notify you of our ongoing surveillance of Red Faction elements and to affirm our commitment to the sovereignty of the Terran Embassy. Rest assured, we're prepared to assist with any security enhancements you may require." Alito inclined his head slightly, as if acknowledging the Federation's good intentions. "Your support is appreciated, Admiral," he said. "However, we've already bolstered our security protocols to ensure the safety of our personnel and assets on Cosmir, and while we welcome the Federation's surveillance, I'd like to emphasize that Terran operatives will continue their own investigation." Aeon's brow lifted ever so slightly. "Their own investigation?" he mused, wondering how deep the Terran intelligence network reached. The Federation Intelligence Division had always regarded the Republic as a passive entity, reliant on Federation information and security measures. But Alito's words suggested something else entirely, a carefully guarded autonomy that few in the Federation had even considered. "We're glad to hear the Republic is taking this situation seriously," Aeon replied. "With the growing threat, collaboration could be in our mutual interests. Do you have reason to believe the embassy is directly at risk?" Alito hesitated, a rare break in his calm. Red Faction's ideology aligns closely with Council principles. They see us as carriers of ideas foreign to their way of life, free navigation, open diplomacy. Some radicals view the Terran embassy as a symbol of destabilization, Admiral, and as you may have noticed, they are heavily armed. Aeon nodded, understanding the gravity in Alito's tone. "Then, let's ensure they don't succeed," he replied quietly. I'll deploy additional resources to monitor the surrounding area." Elito's expression softened, the faintest hint of a smile breaking through his diplomatic mask. "Thank you, Admiral. And should our operations overlap in any way, I trust the Federation will respect our personnel in the field." "Of course, Mr. Elito," Aeon said, holding the man's gaze through the screen. "We wouldn't have it any other way." As the transmission ended, Aeon exhaled, his mind racing. The Terrans had been more aware, more prepared than he'd expected. Aeon leaned back in his chair, his gaze fixed on the ceiling. 14 tiles. He counted them, every time he needed to regain focus, to gather his thoughts and center himself. But today, those familiar tiles offered little comfort. The Terrans may be ahead of us on this. That's good, he told himself, yet the thought gnawed at him. If they'd already fortified the embassy and conducted their own intelligence operations, this level of vigilance might signify something more than a general precaution. They're anticipating something specific, he mused, a realization that filled him with unease. The Terrans were meticulous, but they were also notoriously restrained, always choosing diplomacy over confrontation. For them to mobilize this quickly was an anomaly. He leaned forward, his hand moving automatically to his comm panel. "Send a directive to the Analysis Division," he instructed his secretary. "I want all encrypted traffic to and from the Terran embassy monitored through the hyperspace relay. If we see a sudden spike, notify me immediately." "Yes, Admiral," she replied. As he sat back, Aeon rubbed his temples, muttering to himself, "This isn't how pacifists are supposed to handle threats." For years he'd watched the Terran Republic's slow, deliberate diplomacy, their public stance of non-intervention, and the subtle influence of their free maritime shipping accords, which had opened up neutral space in ways that baffled even the Federation's diplomats. The Terrans were supposed to be the stabilizers, the distant, enigmatic force that imposed calm without lifting a weapon. But now, they were starting to behave like a power bracing for something imminent. Aeon couldn't shake the sense that there was more to this than they were letting on. The Republic's reluctance to engage directly in the power dynamics of the galactic core had often been written off as naivete by some, but to those who knew them well, it hinted at something else. A hidden depth, a potential they'd never fully revealed. Aeon sighed. He pulled up the intelligence reports from agents scattered across Cosmir, his mind sharpening into focus as he scanned each one. A rash of minor disturbances had been reported over the past few weeks, incidents that might have seemed routine under different circumstances, but now stood out with a strange, unsettling synchronicity. There had been a spate of tech disruptions across the city's industrial sectors, supposedly caused by random power failures. 3 high-profile executives from prominent Federation-allied corporations had received anonymous threats, prompting heightened security in key commercial districts. And just this morning, a small-scale riot had erupted in one of the lower residential sectors, instigated by activists calling themselves the Cosmian Voice. Their message was fragmented, incoherent, something about reclaiming autonomy from foreign interference, but it echoed the rhetoric used by Red Faction. Aeon furrowed his brow. Are these isolated incidents, or carefully planted distractions? He wondered, leaning closer to his display as he traced patterns in the digital map of Cosmir's surface. Could any of these incidents be a diversion? He muttered under his breath, half to himself, half as if asking the intelligence reports themselves to reveal their secrets. He knew how Red Faction operated, with cunning misdirection, embedding false leads among real threats to divide and dilute Federation response. If this was part of a larger operation, it would make perfect sense for them to sow chaos across multiple fronts, stretching the Federation's resources thin. But the Terran embassy, that was an entirely different target. A symbol rather than just a logistical asset. If Red Faction truly intended to strike there, then these smaller disturbances could indeed be misdirection, a cover for something much larger and more devastating. Ion toggled through layers of the data stream, cross-referencing keywords, locations, and timelines. Suddenly, one report caught his attention, a routine update from an informant embedded in one of Cosmir's underground markets. Buried in the report was a single line: increased interest in high-grade explosives among Red Faction operatives. He felt a chill. If they're stockpiling explosives, the embassy could be only one target among many. Aeon activated his secure comm channel. "Lieutenant Karen," he called, waiting for his aide to respond. "Go ahead, Admiral. Pull a list of all recent arms purchases on Cosmir, particularly explosives, cross-referencing with any known Red Faction contacts, and keep a close eye on those commercial district security upgrades. Anything remotely connected to the Terran embassy perimeter, I want monitored around the clock. Report any unusual patterns immediately." Caring acknowledged and signed off, leaving Aeon alone once more with his thoughts. In his gut, he sensed that Red Faction's plot was unfolding with careful precision. The Terrans had likely detected it before anyone else, yet they'd been just as careful not to reveal how much they knew. The embassy could be a primary target, or it could simply be a lure, a focal point to distract the Federation's attention while Red Faction carried out a more devastating plan in the heart of Cosmir. Ion leaned back again, the 14 ceiling tiles seeming to press down on him. If he made the wrong call, lives would be lost, not just his own people, but the Terrans who had, for better or worse, entrusted their security to the Republic's neutrality. Ion reached for the comms panel, his fingers moving with practiced precision as he initiated a secure line to the planetary governor's office. The line hummed for a moment before connecting, and a soft, polite voice answered. "This is the office of Governor Lysana Drex," said the voice, calm and professional. "How may I assist you?" "This is Admiral Aeon of Federation Intelligence," he replied, his tone brisk but respectful. "If the governor has a moment, I need to speak with her. This matter requires her immediate attention." There was a brief pause, the sound of muted tapping as the assistant relayed the message through a priority channel. Moments later, a stronger voice came through, one with a hint of tension that betrayed her awareness of the heightened alert across Cosmir. "Admiral Aeon," Governor Drex greeted him directly, her tone steady. "I understand this is urgent. What's the situation?" Ion straightened in his chair, feeling the weight of the words he was about to speak. "Governor Drex, I'm contacting you regarding Red Faction activity across the capital. We've observed significant escalations in recent days, incidents which are increasingly aligning with coordinated tactics. Intelligence suggests they may be planning a major operation, possibly targeting high-profile locations, one of which includes the Terran embassy in Vassar's old city district." A subtle intake of breath from the governor was audible over the line. "The Terran embassy?" she repeated, a hint of incredulity threading through her voice. "They've never been a target before. Why the sudden interest?" "We believe the embassy represents ideals antithetical to Red Faction's alignment with the Galactic Council's doctrine," Aeon explained. "It's not only the presence of Terran diplomats, it's what they symbolize: neutrality, self-governance, unrestricted commerce. Red Faction sees them as a subversive force within Federation territory." Governor Drex was silent for a moment, processing the implications. "This goes beyond simple sabotage, then," she murmured. "This is ideological warfare." "Exactly," Aeon replied. To mitigate the threat, I'm requesting increased planetary security measures in sensitive zones, especially around diplomatic quarters and high-density commercial districts. My division will monitor the situation closely, but your office's support is crucial to secure the broader area. Drek's voice turned steely, her resolve coming through loud and clear. Consider it done, Admiral. I'll initiate citywide alerts and mobilize additional ground patrols around the embassy. I'll also authorize heightened checkpoint activity in major transit hubs. If Red Faction intends to make a statement, we'll be ready. Ion felt a surge of relief. Drex was a shrewd leader, and her cooperation would strengthen their defenses tenfold. Thank you, Governor. I'll keep you informed of any developments on our end. We may need to coordinate further depending on what unfolds. I'll remain on standby, Drex assured him. And Admiral, be careful. If they're aiming for symbolism, they may be targeting more than just buildings. Aeon understood her meaning. Red Faction's true target might be the Terran embassy, but their goal was to destabilize the Federation's relationship with the Republic. That kind of blow could shake the very foundations of Cosmir's political landscape. As the connection ended, Aeon allowed himself a brief moment of contemplation. Red Faction was no longer just a fringe group. They were a weaponized ideology, striking at the heart of Cosmir's fragile peace. Within minutes of Governor Drex's directive, the transportation network's automated systems redirected traffic around Vassar's old city district. Holo signs and sudden, gentle but unignorable route indicators began lighting up across the bustling transport hubs, instructing citizens to avoid the district. Bullet trains and hover buses adjusted their routes with seamless efficiency, each diversion nudging the streams of commuters away from the diplomatic quarter. The once busy streets surrounding the Terran embassy grew unusually quiet, the foot traffic tapering as people found alternate routes. The diplomatic district, usually a nexus of cross-cultural exchanges and foreign visitors, now had a subtle air of tension, the emptiness amplifying a sense of anticipation. Simultaneously, Federation state police presence doubled. Officers, clad in dark composite armor, began patrolling key intersections and setting up mobile checkpoints. Drones buzzed overhead in tight, synchronized formations, conducting constant aerial sweeps for any sign of irregular movement or suspicious gatherings. Their low, unceasing hum underscored the gravity of the situation, an invisible barrier reinforcing the Terran embassy's perimeter. From his office, Aeon observed the scene on his display. The live feeds captured every angle, every approach, and he noted the strategic positioning of officers and the systemic pattern of drone patrols. The governor's swift action had created a formidable line of defense, even if it was largely invisible to casual observers. Admiral, initial scans are in, reported Lieutenant Karen over the comm. We've identified several clusters of suspicious comms traffic near the old city and, most notably, near the outer perimeter of the Terran embassy. Specific locations? Aeon asked, his gaze narrowing. Karen adjusted his tablet. One is a few blocks southeast, near an abandoned commercial plaza. Another group seems to be operating out of a housing complex nearby, an area known for Red Faction sympathies. Ion felt the adrenaline sharpen his focus. Have local forces lock down the plaza. I want a discreet but thorough search of the housing complex. Coordinate with state police. Don't alert Red Faction, but we need to be in position to intercept if they make any sudden moves. Karen's confirmation was brisk and efficient, and within seconds tactical plans were in motion. Ion leaned back, his thoughts racing. The Terrans had fortified their embassy from within, their quiet vigilance indicating an understanding of the threat's depth. Now, with the Federation tightening the perimeter, Red faction would be forced to adapt or risk early exposure. But that still left one critical question unanswered. What was the Terran Republic waiting for? In his gut, Aeon sensed the Terrans had an insight they were holding back, a piece of the puzzle that might explain Red Faction's motives and their own countermeasures. The sudden priority message from Space Traffic Control pulled Aeon's attention to a new, unexpected development. He opened the line, voice calm but carrying a tone of urgency. "This is Admiral Aeon. Go ahead." "Admiral?" The controller's voice crackled, taut with restrained tension. "We have 8 inbound transports registered under the Terran Star Army. They've just dropped out of hyperspace and are transmitting diplomatic clearance codes. They're on course for the Terran Embassy, sir." Ayalon's pulse quickened. The Terran Star Army was the Republic's elite force, rarely deployed outside their own territories, and certainly not for something as mundane as escort duty. The Terrans had insisted for decades that they were an entirely diplomatic entity within Federation space, a near-pacifist faction focusing on trade and stability. The sudden arrival of Terran military transports was more than unusual. It was a statement. "What's their estimated time to arrival?" Aeon asked, keeping his tone neutral. "They'll touch down at the embassy perimeter in under 10 minutes, the controller replied. "They've been cleared for an exclusive landing zone directly within the Old City district. All other traffic has been rerouted." Aeon's mind raced as he processed the implications. This wasn't just a routine security reinforcement. This was a military presence, albeit one cloaked in diplomatic codes. Whatever the Terrans were anticipating, they weren't relying solely on Federation resources to handle it. "Thank you, Control. Keep me updated if their approach changes. I'll coordinate ground operations on my end," he said, then cut the line. He quickly patched through to Lieutenant Caron, who appeared on the comm almost instantly. Heron, we've got a new situation," Aeon began, wasting no time. 8 Terran military transports inbound to the embassy, cleared with diplomatic codes. They're landing within minutes. Make sure the Federation's ground forces keep a careful but respectful distance. We don't want to provoke them, but I want every eye we have on that landing. Karen's eyes widened slightly, but he nodded. "Understood, sir. Do you think they are here to fortify the embassy, or—" "That's what we're about to find out," Aeon said, his voice grim. "Right now, all we know is that Red Faction might be planning something big, and the Terrans appear to be aware of it in ways they haven't shared." As the Terran transports streaked toward Cosmir's atmosphere, their landing trajectory visible on his screen, Aeon tapped a command into his console, preparing a secure message for the governor. "Governor Drex," he typed, "the Terran Star Army is deploying transports to their embassy under diplomatic clearance. Be prepared for heightened activity within the Old City district. We may need to increase Federation surveillance at key access points, particularly near the diplomatic zone." Just as he hit send, another thought struck him. Aeon leaned back, his gaze hardening. If the Terrans are bringing in a military force, he thought, then Red Faction may be planning something far more destructive than a conventional attack. And if they succeed, Cosmir could become a battleground. He instructed his assistant to maintain an open channel with space traffic control and shifted his attention back to the holomap, watching as the 8 glowing markers, Terran military transports, drew closer to the planet's surface. Aeon's pulse raced as he watched the unfolding broadcast on his monitor. News drones circled above the Old City, streaming live footage of the Terran transports landing within the embassy's fortified grounds. The sleek gray ships contrasted sharply against the embassy's serene white architecture, their presence starkly militaristic, a visual alarm in the diplomatic heart of Cos. On screen, the Terran soldiers disembarked in disciplined lines, clad in heavy, sleek armor that was distinctly different from the ceremonial dress the Republic's few diplomatic guards typically wore. Each soldier carried a kinetic rifle, a direct-action weapon with a reputation for lethality, designed for close-quarters combat and battlefield reliability. A few of the reporters, whispering in hushed tones, began to comment on the unusual display of force. "This is unprecedented," one of them murmured. "Terran troops in combat gear, bearing live-fire weapons, markedly different from their usual diplomatic stance." Isle's attention was snapped back by the governor's voice on the line, her tone decisive but laced with tension. "All right, Isle, I'll declare a state of emergency. The public's already stirred up, and we need to stay ahead of any panic. I'll give an official statement in 10 minutes to reassure the public and explain the heightened security measures." "Thank you, Governor," Iam replied, his relief tinged with worry. "This move by the Terrans, it's as though they're anticipating an assault right on embassy grounds. Red Faction may be planning to breach the diplomatic quarter, possibly to make a statement in full view of the media. We'll coordinate to ensure containment, if it comes to that." Governor Drex's voice dropped, a rare sign of personal concern. "I don't need to tell you that the Federation's relationship with the Terrans is one of our few buffers against the Council. If this escalates, it won't just be Cosmir feeling the effects. It'll ripple through the whole sector." Aeon nodded grimly. "That's exactly what I'm worried about." As he ended the call, he immediately switched to his comms channel with Lieutenant Karen. "Karen, mobilize our rapid response teams to the Old City. I want them stationed around the perimeter, but out of sight. We're going to reinforce security without appearing to surround the Terrans." "Yes, sir," Karen replied. "What's our protocol if Red Faction attempts to breach the embassy?" Ion hesitated. "If Red Faction makes an aggressive move, our teams are to contain the threat without crossing into embassy grounds unless the Terrans request assistance. Their presence here is still, technically, under diplomatic protocols." Garen's silence indicated understanding, and the underlying tension of enforcing non-interference in a situation so clearly charged. Aeon watched as the Terran soldiers formed defensive perimeters around the embassy. Their movements were precise, coordinated, and almost ceremonial, yet every gesture hinted at readiness for combat. "They know something," he thought. "Or they've prepared for a worst-case scenario." Within minutes, the governor's state of emergency announcement broadcast across the planet. A calm, authoritative voice cut through the rising hum of public anxiety. "Citizens of Cosmir, in light of recent events and as a precautionary measure, I am instituting a temporary state of emergency. Please remain calm and avoid the Old City District until further notice. Your safety is our top priority." As the message ended, Aeon's display lit up with a new alert. It was an encrypted transmission, a Terran diplomatic communique marked urgent and addressed to Federation intelligence. Aeon opened it and felt the hair on the back of his neck stand on end. The message was brief, blunt, and chilling. "Admiral Aeon, we have intelligence suggesting Red Faction plans to deploy an explosive device within the Old City, targeting both Federation and Terran interests. Anticipate a high-casualty event if uncontained. The Republic has mobilized assets to mitigate the threat, and we are prepared to share additional intelligence. We request immediate coordination to secure the embassy and the planet." Aeon's jaw tightened. This wasn't just an isolated terror plot. It was a declaration of intent, a move to destabilize both Federation and Terran presence on Cosmir. He sent a swift reply to the Terrans. "Understood. Federation forces are on standby. I'll initiate direct communication with your command to synchronize our efforts." This was now a race against time, a deadly, high-stakes gamble where one wrong move could ignite a full-scale crisis on Cosmir. Across the news channels, live footage of the Terran embassy dominated every screen, cameras zooming in on the familiar Terran flag atop the embassy's main tower. Soldiers clustered around the flagpole, their expressions unreadable as they lowered the flag. The reporters speculated in hushed tones. The lowering of the flag might suggest an evacuation, or perhaps a ceremonial shift, one reporter ventured, her voice taut with uncertainty. On screens across Cosmir, the flagpole stood bare, its emptiness a stark and unsettling sight. In bars and homes, conversations faltered, falling into uneasy silence. All eyes remained fixed on the broadcast, where the embassy soldiers moved with solemn precision. They saluted the flag as it descended, their postures rigid, their movements deliberate. Careful not to let the fabric touch the ground, they folded it with reverence. Such ritualistic discipline was rare for the Terrans. This was the kind of solemnity more often associated with the hyper-militaristic powers of the galaxy. The sight carried an unspoken weight, as though it signified not just an end, but a beginning. For 5 tense minutes, the flagpole remained bare, silhouetted against the embassy's white facade. The emptiness stirred an almost physical unease. Viewers across Cosmir held their breath as the moments dragged on, the usual hum of conversation fading into silence. Then, as abruptly as it had begun, the stillness ended, a flash of motion. Hands unfurling fabric. The Terran flag rose again, its familiar pattern fluttering confidently in the wind. But just beneath it came another flag, black as night, its 4 crimson stars gleaming in the light. It was stark, unfamiliar, foreboding. The camera zoomed in, capturing the ominous contrast of the 2 flags against the embassy's white towers. "We've never seen this flag before," another reporter said, struggling to keep the tension from her voice. For those just tuning in, the Terrans have raised a second flag above their embassy. "We've checked the records. This flag has no precedent on Cosmir." In Admiral Ion's office, the significance was unmistakable, and his heart quickened. A Terran flag officer was here. A 4-star general. The black flag was an unmistakable signal. A high-ranking officer with full Republic authority had arrived, entrusted with complete control over the situation on Cosmir. The embassy was now his command post, his command flag waving in the breeze. This was an escalation, a rare, unmistakable move from the Terrans that changed the stakes entirely. Meanwhile, the news anchors scrambled to find an expert, and within minutes a professor of interstellar history from Cosmir University appeared on the live broadcast. Visibly rushed and slightly disheveled, he stared at the screen, his eyes locking on the black flag with its 4 red stars. His expression went pale, and his jaw slackened in shock. "Professor, what does this mean?" the anchor asked, her voice almost a whisper. The professor swallowed, visibly struggling to collect himself. That flag is the insignia of a Republic flag officer, a 4-star general empowered to make autonomous decisions on the ground in crisis situations. In Terran protocol, it represents the Republic's highest level of authority in the field. The anchor pressed him. "So this is unusual?" "Unusual doesn't cover it," the professor replied, his voice tightening as he regained composure. "When the Republic sends a 4-star general, it means the situation is dire, beyond grave. This is not heightened security, it's preparation for catastrophe." The weight of his words hung in the air as the broadcast returned to live footage of the embassy grounds. Terran soldiers moved with methodical precision, forming deliberate strategic formations. Above them, The black and red flag fluttered ominously in the breeze, a silent warning to anyone who understood its meaning. The Republic was prepared to act, and it would do so with the full, decisive might of a Terran general's command. The professor hesitated, as though weighing his next words carefully. "It's important to understand," he began, his voice low but firm, "that the Terrans are not known for this kind of display. Their reputation across the galaxy is one of diplomacy, mediation, and restraint. They are often the first to propose negotiations, the first to seek compromise in a crisis. Many see them as pacifists, cautious, deliberate, even reluctant to act militarily." He glanced at the flag on the screen again, his expression darkened. "But this," he gestured toward the image, "this is not restraint. This is an escalation, a significant one. A 4-star general, a command flag, and soldiers deploying in such formations can only mean one thing. The Terrans have tried and failed at something critical, something we, the rest of the galaxy, have not been told." The anchor leaned closer, her brow furrowing. "Failed? Failed at what?" The professor exhaled sharply, shaking his head. Perhaps they sought to negotiate with someone, some faction or force, and were rebuffed. Or perhaps their attempts at diplomacy were ignored, or worse, exploited. Whatever the case, this level of military presence suggests they have reached the point where negotiation is no longer an option. And that should concern all of us. For the Terrans to take this step, he paused, his voice faltering before he finished. It means the stakes are far higher than we've been led to believe. The studio fell into a tense silence as his words lingered, their implications stark and undeniable. "Professor, are you saying it's possible that the Cosmir system government or even the Federation government knows something we don't?" The anchor pressed, her voice edged with growing alarm. The professor's expression darkened, his composure slipping further. "It should be painfully obvious that that is the case," he replied sharply, leaning forward as if to emphasize the urgency of his words. Then, almost as an afterthought, he added, "I have to go. I'm getting off this planet before whatever is coming arrives." Without waiting for another question, the professor abruptly cut the connection. His image blinked out, leaving the studio in stunned silence. The anchor blinked, caught off guard. She glanced at her co-host, who seemed equally at a loss for words. Finally, she turned back to the camera, her voice subdued, but trembling. We'll continue to monitor the situation as it develops. Stay with us. To those watching, please do not be alarmed. There is still no word from the governor's office.